Well, hello everybody. I'm back. This is Kevin Spiker, and continuing on my last conversation we had last week about rewilding and the idea of tapping into our more primal functions in our body and primal mindsets to apply towards some of today's modern vexing problems. Which we have a few of them going on right now, don't we? So I am happy to answer some questions along the way. Maybe I'll do that in segments if you have any. Just hang on to them, and we'll take a little question break in a little bit. And I appreciate if you guys have been tuning into some of the past episodes. Um, I hope that this knowledge is helpful in trying to make sense of a lot of the confusion out there and give you something to sort of take with you and tap into as we make it through the ever changing challenges that seem to face us on a daily basis here now. So I hope everybody's doing well. I hope everybody's staying healthy and not. In too much of a bad situation here. This is to review a little bit from last time. The concept of rewilding stems a lot from the work of botanist and author and researcher Arthur Haynes and someone he's mentored over the years, Daniel Vitalis, who I had a wonderful experience with and at a retreat getaway, and it really solidified the knowledge for me. I had also been learning the principles of the Weston A. Price Foundation, which also draws from the indigenous cultures of the world for answers. And I actually have the book here that changed many a life. In fact, Daniel Vitalis himself admits that coming across this book was one of the major changing points for him, coming from a 10-year stint as a very staunch vegan and avoiding any kind of animal foods. This was the game changer for him. And what Weston Price, just to give you the backstory on him and then how this all ties into rewilding. Weston A. Price was a dentist in the 20s and 30s. He was also the head of research for the American Dental Association at the time. And this was during the introduction of a lot of the world's first processed foods, the condensed milks, the refined grains, vegetable oils, quote unquote, vegetable. And hey, Roberta. Well, what super info? We got plenty coming at you here. So I always get like sidetracked here. The comments. So what Weston Price set out to do in his research was to figure out what was happening. There was a phenomenon of terrible dentition going on in the country. People's teeth were coming in more crooked than ever. There was rampant tooth decay and a lot of new problems happening in people's mouths that we hadn't seen to this extent prior to that. And it had just happened to coincide with the introduction of all these newly sort of discovered and pushed on the world fake foods. So what he set out to do was travel to indigenous cultures around the world to try to reverse engineer this problem. He wanted to find the people who had really great teeth and none of these new modern problems we were experiencing. And what he discovered time and time again over the course of about 10 years, traveling to the far corners of the world, was that the people of the world, the more natural people that had stuck with their indigenous ways and their traditions, exhibited wonderful health, no chronic illness, none of these dental issues, and also among the world, they all seem to focus in on a core of key nutrients, the fat soluble vitamins being one that you would see across the world, although from different sources in each area. So vitamins A, D, E, and K2. Um, K2 was really kind of discovered by Weston Price, and he called it Activator X. And it was one of the more mysterious nutrients that he had come across because it was simply so devoid in our American diets. So we've now come to call that K2, and really important, crucial balancer of the vitamins A and D, and transporter of calcium to the bones and rather than the soft tissues, and could be a real player in heart disease and arterial damage. So big discoveries that are still being fleshed out now by the Weston A. Price Foundation through more modern scientific techniques. But back in the day, what he would do, he would uh, travel to, like, one of the first ones he went to was in the Swiss Alps, and these really remote villages that had to be completely self-sufficient. It was in traversable by any kind of large vehicles. And what he would do with each village that he explored was line up the children of the village, line up everybody, but he was particularly interested in the children because they're in the developmental stage here. And what he found time and time again was, as you can see, very straight teeth. They weren't even using toothbrushes or any of the sort of modern tools that we tend to lean on so much. And I found that they were just really robust health wise. And then he would then compare that same gene pool of people in the nearby port cities and places that had begun to import a lot of these new Americanized foods. And he saw the same issues we were having in America, which was just a lot of tooth decay with the younger folks, and then also with mothers who were had started to consume these foods in that time. Their ability to have children was diminished, and the children were the ones coming out then with the crooked teeth, which was an indicator that bone structure was inhibited by these limiting nutrients of the body. The It was actually causing our faces to form smaller in the womb due to malnutrition during that time that we're in the womb. And what would happen is there was no room for the full size teeth to even fit into our mouths anymore. And that's something we've pretty much taken for granted as normal life. Like you become a teenager and you get braces. You got to go get your teeth straightened. This was something that human beings really didn't have to do up until very modern times here. So I think we really take it for granted that crooked teeth are just a part of life. But back in the early 1900s, this was not the case, and Weston Price set out to figure out what was really going on there. So through studying all of these people around the world, he went to the Swiss Alps, he went to Africa, he went to Australia and South America, and studied all kinds of indigenous people from different walks of life that all managed to find their vitamins A, D, E, and K from either fish or animals that they would sometimes either raise or hunt. In Africa, there was practices of bloodletting with the cattle, and some of those are that's the some of the most robust humans still on the planet. The Maasai, right? They they are known to just dominate in sports and things. They're just runners, just amazing runners. They're like 7 feet tall, and one of their main practices was bloodletting of cattle, and they drank raw milk. And there's even modern interviews now from the foundation where they traveled back and are retracing his steps and to talk to the people. And the consensus there was that the people were begging for this knowledge to get out because they were really put off by the foods and the medicines that we were trucking into them, to claiming that they were so much better and this is the future and get with it. They were have already seen the same types of degeneration happening in their people, and they are urging each other to stay with their traditions, even though they're being touted as old-fashioned or not part of the way of the future, the new world order. So interesting interview there. If you check out the Weston A. Price podcast collection, It's fantastic. So westonaprice.org, you can get into some of that stuff. So, and then also what he found consistently among these cultures was the use of fermented foods. They would always culture their foods to preserve their harvest. Um, and little known to them, they were getting their dose of probiotics on a regular basis and pretty much with every meal to enhance the digestion and replenish their gut flora. Um, they would always eat some kind of animal food, always eat some kind of vegetable food, and a mix of either raw and cooked in both of those categories. They were always rearing their mothers well, preparing them for pregnancy, and giving them very special diets depending where they were to ensure a smooth birth and a robust little baby at the end. And they have very little difficulty with childbearing. It's another sign of physical degeneration when the pelvis has now also come in a little bit undersized, and it's getting harder and harder for modern people to even fit babies through the birth canal because of the shrinking bones. And this is a generational problem. We're about 2, 3 generations into processed foods and really seeing infertility as a major issue in modern people. None of this was found with the indigenous folks. So we can start to really pinpoint their lifestyle choices, their food choices, and try our best in this modern world to model ourselves and seek out food sources in our area that reflects that wisdom. We're really fortunate, I'm involved with getting farm fresh food to people, and we're just so fortunate to have nutrient dense options coming from within 200 miles of us here, which is still, I would consider local, the local food shed, one truck away in a sense. And um, so, get in touch with me if you're interested in getting connected to some of the farms that represent our best way of emulating an ancestral diet in our area here. And depending where you are in the world, there'll be options for you there. I think the importance being on sourcing locally. There's benefits to just taking in just the faint microbial presence that comes from an organically raised piece of fruit or vegetable that if you don't wash that thing to death and just take in some of that from your area, you'll find yourself doing a little better in allergy season, eating local honey and things to bolster your immune system and educate your immune system. So yeah, reach out if you'd like to learn more about that. And westonaprice.org if you want to see more about the studies and the very conclusive evidence from many decades ago now that processed food was moving us in the wrong direction. And sadly, nothing really changed because of his studies at that time. And now we're able to confirm everything with more modern techniques. And he was definitely on the mark. So then that brings me back to then how that tied into rewilding and the wisdom of our modern Aborigines. We call this the movement sort of creating the neo-Aboriginal, meaning that Arthur Haynes specifically has a vision for our future, embracing methods of food raising like permaculture and not digging up the land to create food, but utilizing more of the environment and those forces to our benefit rather than trying to fight them back with more modern agricultural methods. And ethical animal husbandry as part of that to help us obtain the kind of fat soluble vitamins that we would have normally harvested from the wild, which is just not going to happen anymore. We've kind of crossed into a new era that foraging and hunting and gathering and things like that isn't going to do it for the amount of people that we're looking after now as a human race. So we talk about the sort of a neo-Aboriginal revolution where we can pull that wisdom from the ancestors and apply it now into our modern lives. Do better to source, work harder to source from our hardworking farming families in the area that are staying with traditions and creating that kind of bountiful food and bountiful nourishment that our bodies are really well adapted for and can't really do without. This is where I think we fall into a lot of our disease, and our weak immunity right now is rooted in a very faulty food supply. That it's nobody's fault. I mean, we've all just been raised around what we could access. But for those of us really taking an interest in bolstering our health and taking control of our health, then it's a great way to be in charge of your health trajectory. So with Daniel Vitalis, I was just kind of rehashing a lot of the notes I had taken from the Intrinsic Taboo weekend that we had spent together up at the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors, which is Alex Gray's wonderful getaway place where all his art has now come to live, and the perfect backdrop to learn about your body, because if you look into Alex Gray's artwork, it's sort of a see-through version of ourselves where, you see all the bones and all the complexities of our nervous and circulatory systems, and then intermeshed with chakra points and energy pathways that more of the sort of the holistic medicine world embraces. And all of that just going on while we're learning about ancient wisdom and a lot of the downfalls that we face in the modern world that are affecting our health. Um, so we, God, there were so many good ones that I wanted to like touch on. Um, Arthur Haynes talks about the concept of, where was it? So in our society, we now face a choice. Are we going to be egocentric, or are we going to be ecocentric? And what he means by that, if you can picture the egocentric model of mankind in the environment, places mankind at the pinnacle, at the very top. Like, we have risen to the top of the food chain, and everything else is a subset of us and a servant to us, and versus an ecocentric model to place humanity in, and it's more of a circle filled with all the animals and wildlife and things of the ecosystem, elements of the ecosystem, and mankind is simply just one speck in that whole picture. And I think it's a nice way of grounding what all of our philosophies with all this. So um, that was an interesting perspective. Last session we had talked about the idea of domestication, which is something I'm going to unpack a little bit more this time. Um, Domestication meaning a being of the home, um, and not being a part of the environment anymore, using walls to separate us from the environment, and not being in tune even spiritually with the living world around us anymore, and being really hyper human. And what happens with domestication? We see it with animals. When we've domesticated all of these different species to become our partners, and maybe more our servants at times, and our pets and our entertainment. But they all stemmed from wild progenitors. So wolves were transformed into dogs. That was our first major achievement in that department of changing animals genetically into something that is far less fearsome, more docile, easy to work with, and we can control their breeding. So um, when we domesticate animals, we destroy their natural hierarchy, like taking away the alpha dog and becoming that alpha dog. Um, and another term I wanted to bring into the last session, which is fascinating to me, which is called neoteny. And I called up an article that defines that really nicely. It's spelled Neoteny, neoteny. And it's something we see in humans and also any of the creatures that we've domesticated. And it is the retention of the juvenile features of an adult creature. Um, and basically, what it means is that we're, as a domesticated creature, suspended in a state of kind of permanent juvenile behavior. And we see that with dogs and cats, especially too, because they tend to, throughout their whole lives, act like their juvenile version. Like, in a sense, compared to a wolf, every dog pretty much acts like a puppy all its life. And kittens, develop into cats, but really kind of behave more like kittens compared to something like a wild bobcat or a panther and the wild hunters, predators out there. In the wild, you don't have the luxury of retaining your juvenile qualities for very long. You're really forced to grow up quickly in the wild. Yet somehow, with mankind, we're able to really live out a full life of, I'd consider maybe more juvenile behavior and action compared to what our ancestors would have been able to achieve in a lifetime of really learning to survive and hunt and pass on knowledge and discover natural medicines and healing techniques and really develop their spiritual depth. And so we see neoteny pretty much as the one real defining feature of domestication. It's an immaturity, like a lifelong immaturity, and so I encourage you to look into that topic. I'm finding some really fun stuff online about that as well, and we also can kind of see that with so we also domesticate plants. So the the wild progenitors of things we really take for granted in the grocery store um, came from very, very different life forms in the wild. The crab apple is more akin to what apples used to be. They were very small, they were bitter. Same with tomatoes, eggplants. These things came from these bitter little, almost like berries, compared to what we were able to breed them into over many generations. Um, one wild progenitor, the brassica, encompasses all the lettuce, the spinach, broccoli, collards, kale, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi. I mean, the list goes on, and that's all from one genetic progenitor, wild progenitor, brassica, which was a pretty modest plant. So, um, in doing that, unfortunately, we breed out a lot of the natural plant medicines. When you taste something bitter, you're tasting the medicinal component of it. And we tended towards juicy, colorful, sweeter types of foods and fruits and things, and bred out all of like what our ancestors would have been getting, just a bit of the medicine on a daily basis, just a maintenance level of medicine and plant compounds that kept us in check, kept us in good health. Um, oh man, there's so much good stuff from this seminar. So by breeding out the good stuff, we're left with kind of an empty food and something that's more ready to be shipped around and something that's more commercially viable and something that Weston Price called the displacing foods of modern commerce, which is dominating our diets these days. These are foods that are more like edible bargaining chips. And right now, what we're seeing is a hoarding of those edible bargaining chips until things settle down and markets feel comfortable purchasing things in bulk and filling their shelves again. One day the shelves are bursting with a kind of an overabundance of food, and now suddenly, poof, where did it all go? Well, it didn't. It's not that it's gone. It's just being hidden away until the commercial viability of it returns. And personally, I like to get off grid in that sense and know that I can source food directly from farmers, and they're doing quite well and staying with their production methods, and not much has changed for them. In fact, they're just scrambling to keep up with all the new business. So um, that's just a completely separate food system that you can tap into that not many people are aware of. And we're starting to see the vulnerabilities with a lot of the big systems in place right now. I mean, economically, we're facing quite a recession, I believe, and a global one at that. So let's hope this all pays off because a lot of people are going to be in trouble in the coming months. And I think it's a great time to bone up on your survival skills and your ancestral wisdom to see us through. Um, I'll just pause for one sec. I just want to see if there's any specifics here. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks. I'm glad you like what I'm talking about. What's up, Alex? Um, so let's see. Oh, and I wanted to also get into the idea. So, not only have we domesticated plants into being something more viable for us commercially, but we actually clone plants. And the first things that would come to mind are things like bananas and apples, where each of the fruit that is bared then is actually sterile. Bananas are sterile mutations from more of like a naturally occurring plantain type of fruit that you would have to cook to actually obtain the nutrition from. And along the way, there was a mutation that resulted in a sweeter, more moist and edible without cooking kind of fruit. So these things need to be actually cloned, and they're grown from like tissue cultures. They're propagated asexually. With apples, they uh, ins- uh, insert, I guess, the seed or like into the bark of the young sapling to create a specific type of apple. Because what's fascinating is there's five seeds in each apple, and if you just toss that apple and those five seeds each start to grow, it'll each of those seeds will grow a different type of apple, will produce a different kind of apple, which is one of nature's little devices to keep diversity alive and going. So we have found so many ways to sort of work against nature's natural processes to create things that are more palatable and more commercially viable. So just think about that as you walk around your grocery store if you ever get out. That there are very few wild foods available to us, and the closest thing I love to add to like my smoothies would be blueberries. Blueberries are very close to their wild progenitor and still packed with the antioxidants and all the good stuff you want to get from them. So, stick with things that you could almost imagine coming across on a walk in the woods. Um, have you ever seen wild broccoli? No. Have you ever seen cauliflower just popping out of the bushes in the woods? No. All of these things need to be propped up and tended to. They require a lot of attention and water and fertilizer. Um, they are a shadow of their wild progenitors. You know you've got something pretty good and wild if it can actually escape from your garden. That's one good indicator that the genetics haven't been dulled down to the point at which it wouldn't be able to actually just spring out and start spreading on its own. If you've ever raised like something like peppermint, I mean, it is you don't have to start with much. You'll have more peppermint than you know what to do with after a while. So you can tell that peppermint is much closer to well, it's actually is considered still a wild food. So think about that as you make your food decisions. In terms of any kind of animal foods, this is why I really like the Amish farmers. They're using heritage breeds that are much closer to the wild progenitor. They may not produce the quantities that industrial versions are used to, but the nutrient density is intact and much gentler on the land with their practices of rotating the animals around smaller paddocks and imitating the movement of herds, and with the cattle clearing the land first, and then followed by the wild. In the wild, it would have been like wild fowl that come through and peck through the now shortened grass and nibble from the grubs growing in the droppings, and follow that natural process, and then add their own nitrogen rich fertilizer back to the soil to regrow the grass and prepare it for the next herd to move through, in a sense. So by keeping the animals moving, keeping that grass from reaching any sort of the senescence, which is the final phase of grass where it's drooping and wilting. That's not very healthy grass. You know, grass is meant to be mowed down by herbivores, and that process is how we can then sequester carbon from the atmosphere and stimulate good microbial life in the soil and have a real working environment to create your food in versus the methods of clearing away lands and sort of sterilizing the land, fighting back nature at all times, and then having to prop it up with extra water that isn't retained in the lousy soil that you have now, and the microbial life in the soil is all distorted, and having to add back in just to get weaker and weaker products over time. So we want to really think regeneratively in terms of creating our food and sourcing our food. So we're happy to help you with that and finding great sources that abide by the rules of nature and not by the rules of modern commerce. Um, Let me just see what other fun highlights I had from the seminars here. Um, some interesting facts about our deep ancestors. So rewilding is all about discovering the differences between domesticated humans and our wild forebearers. And something I found very interesting was that, for the most part, hunter-gatherer tribes and indigenous cultures that even still last today are, for the most part, egalitarian, meaning that men and women carry equal weight in terms of their sort of, I guess you call it political influence or whatever, social influence. Um, I just think that that's a wonderful something for us to aspire towards. Versus, say, the polarizing movements like, say feminism being kind of swinging the pendulum the opposite way. And we live in quite a patriarchal society, meaning male dominated, and that can be traced back to once we started to form our civilizations and indoctrinate people with religions that tended to have a sort of a male overpowering figure, deity, whatever, to rule over. So they it's something that started to disappear as we became more and more civilized, became a male-driven world. So I like that we were egalitarian in our ancient times, prehistoric times, and it also, oh yes, and religions and the creation myth make for this domestication of plants and domination over our environment, and it kind of took us in the wrong direction. So we're 15,000 years astray from what was a 200,000 plus year journey as creatures of the earth, and not just what we call humans, and this sort of this separateness from the earth. So the now in comparison, we can take the creation myth of, like, say, Christianity, but most major religions have a very similar creation myth, where once there was sort of this Garden of Eden, which I would liken to being the natural state of the world. And hunter gatherers, for instance, would only really put in. It seems like it was such a hard life, but they would put in about 15 hours a week to gather their food, and they would have a much wider variety than their soon to come civilized farmer agriculturists that had to work 40 hours a week to create grain-based foods. Not a lot of variety and not a lot of nutrient density. So we more than doubled our work week in terms of food creation, and diminished the variety. So what once was sort of a Garden of Eden for us and a plentiful world to live in, and our population was kept sort of in check by those conditions, we then sort of fell from grace. We ate the fruit of knowledge of how to sort of meddle with genetics, in a sense, to start to create plants that would do our bidding and create animals that would stay by our side and provide us with sustenance and tamper with the intricate and immutable web of life that we're still struggling to understand. So, that's where we went astray, and you can kind of see that reflected in creation myths, where once everything was fine, and then there was a fall from grace and an acquisition of knowledge that maybe we weren't quite ready for. And I just think that's kind of fascinating. So, um, we're trying to adopt that feral mindset. I talked about that last time, meaning that you're kind of a wild human all over again. You've gone feral. You were once domesticated and you played by the rules of that game, but you've escaped now, at least even in your mind, and you can make decisions in life based on a real natural evaluation of your environment and just become strong and adaptive and instinctive again. Um, we talk about in rewilding, we talk about not just food diet, but actually the diet of the natural elements that we need to take in. Um, so it goes beyond just what we can put in our mouth, but we need to absorb light. Um, we need to basically abide by what we've considered to be in legend to be these core elements: earth, water, air, and fire, which translates into solids, liquids, gases, and plasma in our modern times. So you can see science has those same core elements as its forms of matter that the ancient legends did with their embracing of earth, water, air, and fire. And so, earth, obviously, we eat of the earth. We can also actually consider geophagy a part of that, the eating of clays and absorbative um, detoxifying elements that we can get from our environment, where in places where ancient man was forced to consume some plants that had a poisonous quality, we would consume them with clay then to absorb those toxins and still be able to extract the nutrients we needed from the plants. So that's the earth element. And then water, we've gone into that, where I'm big on harvesting spring water. But at least if you can source from a spring that like a facility that is built on site at the spring, it's your best way of getting toxin-free water. I personally enjoy the sort of the ethereal qualities of wild spring water. I think that it comes with it's imbued with a spirit and a sort of a primal wisdom from the earth itself. And um, there's accounts of people even having memories returned to them of their child. Like there was a story of a wandering orphan who was seeking out his homeland and came across a spring that brought back his memories and mapped his route for him of where to return to. So some pretty magical stuff if you dig back into the history of water and real, truly natural water sources. So I think we've always had a real connection to our water. We've always sprung societies around springs as that built them up around the springs. Spring, all the town names with springs in them: Chester Springs, Springdale, Springville. Um, and then another important element that we do take in here is air, and making sure that our homes that we ventilate properly and let some of that natural air in to replenish the oxygen we're consuming and exhaling a bunch of carbon dioxide. And then also then our use of fire being a huge advantage suddenly over the natural world, to be able to cook our foods and expand our diet through use of fire. And we're still the only creature who has mastered use of fire. But then fire also being the absorption of sunlight and the nutrients that we can gain from healthy sunlight exposure, getting it into our eyes, getting it onto our skin, and not washing it off right away. The first thing we always want to do is rush right back into the shower and wash off all the sweat, but we're also washing away the vitamin D forming in the outer layers of our skin. So just be aware of that. Um, so, and then also eating from the the different elements of the earth kind of based foods, meaning that we need to eat fungi, however you want to say it, fungus. We need to eat mushrooms, and we need to eat bacteria in the form of the fermented foods. Um, we need to just take in all of these kingdoms of life to really complete the picture for ourselves. And so that's where the ancestors can really teach us a lot. And I encourage you to explore the discoveries of Weston A. Price on westonaprice.org. Um, they have the Wise Traditions podcast, which is always fascinating and very up to date with what's going on right now too. Very important messages coming through from them. Um, Something called the exosome theory, which I encourage you to explore more. Gives us a kind of an alternate viewpoint on what the nature of viruses and how they may well be an extension more of ourself and more of an immune response of our own than a critter from the outside world. So explore that stuff. I'm gonna maybe get into that as we go on with these sessions, um, and yeah, let me just see if there's any other questions here. Yeah, Tom's been out getting some water. I see he's been reporting back a spring that he found that looks really good. I'm gonna check that out next time I'm in that Lancaster area. Hey, Nikki. Yeah, Tom says, nothing boosts morale like a good fire, and we just had our first backyard fire of the season that back in Neptune City the other night, and I gotta say there is something really primal about that situation of sitting around a fire. It feels like you're tapping into something that you've known through your deep ancestry. That us gathering around fires was the first sort of social circles. It was our celebration of what we had hunted and were able to dine on, and it was where legends and stories were born and shared. Um, I just feel that every time I'm around a fire, I just feel an ancient communication happening. So get outside, make yourself a little fire, and try to tap back into that. It's a fascinating, just a fascinating element to your life. Our love of fire. We're all pyromaniacs. We're a species of pyromaniacs, and we've over the eons transformed fire into then controlling lightning and electricity and powering entire cities, and it's I think our obsession with fire that might have gotten us into a bit of trouble here. So, fascinating topic, fire. um, just see if there were any other main points I wanted to touch on. But I'm going to keep exploring this. But I hope that this piques your interest in the wonderful things we can learn from the past, and that technology should be our servant at times like this. And never let the tool take control of your life. So, more on that later. Piper, thanks for chiming in there too. Good to see you. We got to get together here soon, man. Hopefully things lighten up and we're able to really get back together and feel like our human bonds again. I think it's something we're really missing right now. Um, we're really social creatures, and to deny us the ability to have physical contact and be in each other's presence is going to take its toll. So we have to really bolster our health right now as we weather the storm and get through the sort of this lockdown phase of all of this, but then also learn more about viruses, learn more about the nature of the microbes in your body. There's something called the virome. We have a microbiome, which is more of the bacterial and the fungi presence, and then there is the virome, which is something else that outnumbers us cell for cell by massive margins. So if you ever want to just get a quick intro on the microbiome, check out my TEDx talk, which is called Making Friends with Your Microbes. And that's just up there on the YouTubes. And in 16 minutes, you'll have a basic understanding of the reality that we are 1/10 human cells and outnumbered by our microbial partners. And a very small percentage of them pose us any existential threat. And if you bolster your gut flora and crowd out the bad guys, you have a big advantage right now. So get your immune system in order, learn about the microbiome, learn to embrace the microbial world as more of your partner and not as your enemy. We've got to really soften up our obsession with germ theory, which is still prevailing after being disproven so many times here. Um, once we had gotten for instance, our ancient ancestors really didn't understand that it was microscopic life that caused their foods to ferment or to rot, but they knew that there was a divine force at work there, and they learned how to shape that and use that to their advantage. Now, once we got microscopes and started peering closer at ourselves and the world around us, we discovered all these creepy crawly things all over everything, and suddenly they became the target for all of our, the reason that we were sick, and the cause of all of our human uh, problems here. And we just have been waging a war against them ever since. We're finally realizing that by diminishing our natural microbial partners on us and inside of us, that it leaves us very, very vulnerable, and it affects our mental state. It affects our ability to fight off pathogens, and uh, literally they break down nutrients in our gut. So we're not if we don't have a good balance there, we're not even getting the most out of our food. They inform our immune system. They balance the acidity of our gut. There's so many crucial roles that we've underestimated with our microbial partners. So look into all that, and this is your time to learn. I think this is not a good time to be tuned out and over entertaining yourself and distractifying. This is your time to really get wise to a lot of the things going on and a lot of the mistakes we've made in just the past century that have gotten us into a lot of problems. So um, I hope this has been helpful and inspiring. I don't see any specific questions, so you can always message me if you'd like to get connected with farms, if you'd like to have get into some of the resources that I've been using as reliable information during a very confusing time. I just was taking stock. I have 4.5 days worth of summits that just personally I've amassed and have taken in. If you were to play them back to back, it's almost a week there. And yeah, Jessica, her mom, we've all been digging in our own ways. So between all of us, we kind of call that culture den. That's the umbrella for this work, the research and the application of Weston Price principles and rewilding principles. So yeah, if you've been wondering like what's going on with the social media structure for me, like the Kevin Spiker page, that's me, and that's my music, and that's my fun personal life. And then Culture Den, which was for 3 years the event space that we had launched in outside of Philadelphia. That was Culture Den Event Space, and Culture Den still remains with its original vision, which was about fermented foods and cultured foods and human culture and the beauty of connecting through food and music and art. And then the Weston Price page that we've got going for North Jersey, Weston A. Price North NJ, is about sourcing farm fresh food and putting out the knowledge that comes from the foundation, confirming the studies of Weston Price about nutrition and lifestyle of our indigenous ancestors, and some of the food politics and issues around legislation and things like that. So between those sort of three platforms, you can dive into all these fun things that I explore in my life. So I think that the whole theme of Culture Den in the beginning was the unity of art, music, and food being the core of human culture. And I love how they all thread into one another, and you can see those exhibited in our deep ancestry. And it's something that we really need to kind of fight for now and get back and bring back. I think we're in danger of losing a lot of our freedoms and getting more and more familiar with a lifestyle that isn't very suitable for humans. This locked in, phone centric, computer centric, digitized, surveilled life that we're now being ushered into gently. So, more on that. I'm not going to get too much into that, lest I be censored and deleted from the Facebook existence. So, Anyway, you can touch base with me if you'd like connections to any of that other great info. And thank you again. Stay strong, stay healthy, stay independent, stay health sovereign, and yeah, let's get through this, huh? All right, be well. Love you guys. See ya.